Bill Sienkiewicz is an artist who started working in comic books around 1980, which is roughly when yours truly got into superhero comics. I had read plenty of Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck and Archie's and Richie Rich and Little Dot and whatever I could find at garage sales and flea markets. On the newsstand as well, but primarily garage sales, flea markets, trying to buy big bundles of things cheap just so I could read as much as possible. I was a little indiscriminate reader back then just because I loved comics. I loved the comic form and just wanted to get as much of it as possible. Then I got into superheroes by buying those cheap lots, discovering new things. Picked up X-Men 130. It was my first X-Men and the debut of Dazzler right at the beginning of the Dark Phoenix saga. It was like a perfect time to enter that world. It's phenomenal. One of the artists I loved most at that time was Bill Sienkiewicz, who had started drawing Moon Knight in the back of Hulk magazine. And then Moon Knight got its own series in 1980. And Sienkiewicz did this different style, which is very dramatic, lots of 3D looks where someone would have their hand up here, or just something where it really gave a sense of depth, what the people were doing. A lot of other people felt more flat. It was a little 3D, but he's dramatic looks. People would be like, lunging dramatically or falling dramatically or whatever it was. You'd have this, ant view of someone towering above you. It's really cool. And a little bit later, discovered Ms. Mystic, title from Pacific Comics that was drawn by Neal Adams. And I was like, wow, this guy Neal Adams really looks a lot like Bill Sienkiewicz. Weird. It was only later that I discovered that essentially Sienkiewicz was copying Adams. Adams had a very long career in comics before Sienkiewicz was around. Sienkiewicz loved the Adams style and was essentially just doing Neal Adams. But over time, Sienkiewicz started doing less and less of that. He'd have panels that were very much like Neal Adams style, and then like an inset panel of something just super dramatic and very different. I remember this sort of half shot, someone staring at the viewer, and like only half the image was visible, the other half was all in shadow. It was extremely dramatic and sort of, I don't know if it was charcoal or pencil or rough. It was really cool and stood out in this amazing way. So much so that young Eric started trying to copy Bill Sienkiewicz, drawing in Sienkiewicz's style in my own notebook. And Sienkiewicz changed a lot over those few years that he did Moon Knight, and then he went on to New Mutants, which even wilder stuff going on. He did Elektra Assassin with Frank Miller, which was incredibly good, both the story and the art, just going bonkers all over the place. Sienkiewicz also writing and doing the artwork for Stray Toasters. Also really out there. So it was amazing to see him grow like that over the decade, over the 80s. So it was really interesting to look at how he developed his own style from copying someone else to being his own artist with his own look that you could recognize whenever you saw it. And initially it would seem like, is someone else copying Sienkiewicz? So when Sandman debuted at the end of 1988, hey, this Dave McKean guy, he's doing painted collage style that looks kind of like Sienkiewicz. What the heck? Is he copying? No, he's not copying him. He's doing his own thing, and he'd done that earlier, and so they were both doing similar-ish things, but you couldn't really mistake one for the other because they had their own looks to them. So really interesting stuff. And I bring all this up because there's been a lot of talk recently about AI in the game industry, primarily driven by a Kickstarter campaign by Stronghold Games for Terraforming Mars Prelude 2 and some other Terraforming Mars material. Kickstarter recently announced that Kickstarter campaigns would have to reveal when they were using generative AI for the creation of material. And in that Kickstarter campaign, Stronghold Games did that. So Stronghold Games is the primary US publisher for Terraforming Mars. It's designed and developed by Frix Games, which is owned and run by the Frixalius family. There's, I think, 7 different Frixalius siblings who are working in various ways. designing the game and doing graphic design and art and marketing and all sorts of other stuff. And there was a note that generative AI is being used for some of the artwork and material and graphic design. And a lot of people were weirded out by this because Terraforming Mars is an incredibly successful game line. That campaign ended with more than 19,000 backers, more than $2 million in backing. It generates a lot of sales. So why use generative AI instead of paying people to do the art? Now, I forget, one of the Fricks aliases is credited with graphic designer and is using the AI tool, and they'll generate ideas and then change it, modify it, and mix it, so forth. So they'll have ideas and then maybe modify it from that point and get to the final product. So the AI is being used as a tool, which makes sense because there are lots of AI tools that will help people do work. I mean, I use a super simple AI tool, as I understand it. Like, this is like the basest level of AI possible, where you have an image and you want to cut out that image. And so you can just press a button and the background's removed, because essentially that's like an AI tool, because it has to interpret what the image is that you want to keep and then remove everything else. It needs some intelligence in order to do that. So that's an AI tool that I use all the time, because publishers submit game images, or it'll be like, here's the cover and then this big background, and don't want the background, just want the cover. So you want to crop out the cover and only have that. So sure, that's an AI tool and I can understand wanting to use it. But generative AI that creates art feels different from other tools like that. And why? Why does it feel different? Now, generative AI, as I understand it from research I've done, this is talking about Midjourney, which is, I believe, what the Fricks aliases were using. Midjourney has essentially been fed millions of images, lots from the public domain and lots that is not from the public domain. It's been fed all these images, and you can give a prompt to Midjourney and it will generate something. So you can say, give me a picture of a cat holding a balloon, and you'll get a picture of that. And you can be more detailed and say, I want an orange cat with a red balloon, or an orange cat with a red balloon, floating on a cloud, whatever you want to do with a prompt. And then this image will be generated based on all the material that Midjourney has absorbed. And in some ways, Midjourney is like Bill Sienkiewicz copying what it's seen before and generating something. And yet, in another way, it's not, because, of course, Sienkiewicz developed his own style, did his own thing, and went on to become something that is very much his style, unique to him. And if you see other people doing it, you might think they're now copying him. So it's really not quite the same, although kind of the same. I can understand artists being peeved that they are not paid for the work that has been fed to Midjourney, and you can create something with Midjourney that's essentially going to be in the style of a particular artist. So that's strange. You can essentially eliminate the artist, pay the company that owns Midjourney, and then create something in that artist's style. And so, yeah, I can understand why the artist would be peeved at that. Although at the same time, that is sort of what people do, where if you wanted a Neal Adams style, you could hire Bill Sienkiewicz, at least for a while, and you'd have the Neal Adams look, probably for less money, because I'm sure Neal Adams commanded more per page at that time than Bill Sienkiewicz did. So it's kind of the same, and yet it feels gross. And why? Why does it feel gross? I mean, partly I think it's the scale that something operates on, where Bill Sienkiewicz is a human and could draw a limited amount of time each day, and Midjourney is not a human and can just spit out as much things as you want to pay for. endlessly generating things in a style that is recognized as the work of someone else. And so that scale issue is one of the things that I think contributes to the grossness of generative AI. So, sure, humans will copy another artist, at least when they're starting. If you are writing stories and you've only been reading Hemingway, you're probably going to write stories in the style of Hemingway. You are amateur Hemingway coming out with your stories, and Hemingway earns nothing from that. Of course, he's dead, so I don't even know if his family gets any royalties anymore from anything he's done. Not familiar with the Hemingway family tree. But you can borrow Hemingway stories from the library and read them all and then write your own. You can also ask a AI program to generate a story in the style of Hemingway, and it will do so. So again, Hemingway gets nothing out of that. And it's like a human in the way that they're generating those stories, but again, the AI can just do hundreds of them. Probably terribly. So, why does AI feel so gross? One, it's got the scale in which it can generate things compared to what a human is doing. And the human might not be intentionally or consciously copying someone else. Sometimes you are. You're trying to learn how to draw and how to do this shadow and get this muscle just right and trying to mimic what someone else is doing. And then you absorb that over time, and usually you shift into a different style, develop something else, because it's often not great for your reputation just to be like you were the low rent version of someone else. That's not really going to get your name out there in a good way where people are going to hire you. So that's one thing that's going on. The other thing that's going on is that in many ways, the art isn't ideal. There's a lot of issue with generated art having wrong fingers or things overlapping where like the teeth overlap the lips because the program can't interpret things right or can't generate things right or isn't sure exactly how something should look because it doesn't know what it's creating necessarily or know how something should look. So it just approximates and does the best it can. And so you'll get these weird, funky things that don't look right. It's sort of analogous to how a writing AI does things incorrectly. So my wife and I experimented where we had it write biographies of us. Both of us have been writers since the late 90s. We have a lot of material out there. Our name's been in public a lot and just in magazines and various things. We've written a number of books and so on. So we had a public persona. What is our biography? And so we asked it to write a biography, and some stuff is real in there and a lot of stuff is not because there's a lot of Eric Martins, for one thing. I think I was credited with some various game designs. I was credited with other things that I might have written about, and now I was the one who was doing the thing. Lots of stuff my wife had done. In the biography, she had not done. It was not her stuff at all. And there's no way that anyone reading that biography would know that those things were wrong unless they knew us, or they asked us, or they did some research, right? You can have a text AI program write a college paper for you, or an essay, or whatever you want to do. And it may sound good, and then you'll hand it in, and you'll get a terrible grade because it's mentioning facts that aren't wrong, or it's generated proof for an argument where that proof doesn't actually exist. I believe there was a case recently of a law firm that had apparently used AI when it was submitting material to the courts, and it was citing cases that did not exist. It was essentially generating proof for what it was saying, or at least interpreting things incorrectly and coming out with stuff that was not true. And art created often feels that way when it's an AI thing because it doesn't seem true. But it's not true. It's not true in a way that is artistic. And this is where you get to the other point about AI, where you are lacking intent. What are you trying to do with the thing that you are creating? Often when you are writing a story or creating a work of art or making music or whatever it is, you have an intent for what you're trying to do, a feeling you're trying to get across, a story you're trying to tell, something in you that you are communicating to people. And sometimes that's not there. Sometimes someone just has an assignment, they want to get something done. That's it. Get a grade, get paid, whatever it is. Write that article, be done. I've written plenty of news posts where I don't insert myself at all. It's just data coming out. And I'm shaping it in a particular way, and ideally it sounds right. And the sentences ideally are the sentences I would write. Where often I rewrite a game description to, I think, make it sound better or more complete, or just present the material better. So it's in my style, but it's not really my personality coming through. So it's sort of on that realm of maybe it's just AI generated because it's data and it's just coming out. Except I know the data is correct because I looked it up, or I saw it somewhere, or I talked with someone, and I'm relaying all that information. I know it's correct. Whereas the AI thing that comes out, maybe it's not true. Kind of all over the place here. And this is kind of the problem too with AI, is that it's all over the place. There's going to be a lot of it coming out, doing a lot of different things. There's been AI tools that have created songs in the style of a particular artist, and the artist is like, yeah, I was not involved with that in any way, and yet it sounds very much like the artist. It's very weird. And this is where we get into this feeling of grossness, where things are out of control. And I think a big part of that, again, number one, the scale that things are operating on. And number two is the untruthfulness of what's being created, or at least the unverifiability of what's been created, unless you go and do more research, because you're essentially opening a black box and pulling something out, and here it is. And is it valid or not? I don't know. Art works a little differently than the text, because if someone's getting a biography, you can tell whether it's true or not. You can research that and figure that out. If you're creating a story, is it untrue in a particular way? Maybe there's just things that don't connect, but of course it could just be poorly written. A few months ago, I ran across a review for, if I remember correctly, Marvel Dagger, titled by Fantasy Flight Games, where it was a review of Marvel Dagger, and it seemed clear that this had been an AI-generated review because the writing was so incredibly poor, and there are a lot of weird phrases where it would seem like it's trying to make an argument for why this is not good, and then at the same time it turned around and be like, and actually this is good, and this works perfectly because this. And it sounded like there wasn't really a human behind those words. It was just coming out at random. Something I admit that my words coming out right now might seem like as well. So it seems icky. And I can understand why a lot of people don't want to see things that have been created by AI. They want to have the work of a person. Often a person who is working in concert with other people, where if I am a designer and then I work with a graphic designer and they're going to come back with certain ideas for how this thing should look like, and I can talk with them and we can figure out what we think the best way to do this is. Where with AI, it's getting something spit out at me, and sure, I can modify it all, but it's still just me on my own. And it seems weird to think that the AI is doing something that couldn't be done by a human. This was a line that Travis Worthington, owner of Indie Game Studios, which owns the Stronghold Games brand, said in an interview with Polygon, where he was asked about the use of AI in these Terraforming Mars expansions, and he kind of made it sound like, it's just inevitable. People are going to use AI, and it's kind of cheap, and we can do it this way. And also, it can generate things that can't be done by a human. It's phenomenal. And it seems like I don't think that's true. I don't think the AI is generating something that couldn't be done by a human. It's just generating something that could have been done by a human, but instead you just pulled the crank and you got something out. Because, of course, it seems disingenuous to say not something that could be created by a human. Because, of course, you could have me coming up with an idea that would not have been generated by any of the other 8 billion humans out there, and it's still generated by a human. We have all different points of view and all different ideas for how we're going to create things and all different backgrounds that we're bringing to our creative process as we were writing or drawing or making music or whatever. We're all putting that education and effort into what we're doing with the intent to make something, to create some output or goal or purpose for the final product. When someone else is reading it or listening or playing or whatever it is, we're trying to create some feeling or emotion out of it. And AI seems like it's separated from all of that. And it's a tool to create something, but it seems much more like you've got a blank that you're trying to fill, and that's it. I have to submit an essay when I'm applying for college. And I put a prompt, here's the essay, and it's done. There's no thought or effort put into that. There's maybe some thought put into the prompt, the thing that I am putting into the generative AI program. There are people now who can be hired to write prompts in smart ways to deliver the result that you want. But the thing that is coming out, the product of that generative AI, is just filling space. There's no intent behind it because the input is so generic. I realize, of course, that contradicts what I just said, where you can hire someone to write a specific prompt to generate the right thing. But the thing being generated, again, it feels like, you're putting Play-Doh in the factory and you push down the handle and it squeezes out the shape of a star because that's the plastic mold that you have in front of it. It just squeezes out that star. So that was the prompt, and now here's the product. And it's cool to see when you're using Play-Doh and doing that. But the end product, the end result, is not something to be savored or treasured or of value of people who look at it. Anyone else is going to look at that and be like, oh yeah, I know how you did that. I've used Play-Doh in the past. Good for you. You learned how to do that. You wanted to be an actual sculptor? Okay, here's what you need to know. And then I'll go into details on all what you're doing. So the AI product just comes out and it feels like an afterthought or like something that's not integrated into the product. And this might be dismissing the work of one of the Frixelius graphic designer people, William Bricker, and I was involved with the art as well, because maybe they're putting in that work and they're doing that. But it, again, has that gross feel to it. I feel like I'm not defining this well. I feel like I don't have a good reason for why I don't like the AI other than it feeling gross. And it sort of feels gross again because of the scale and the lack of intent and the ability to copy someone who's not being credited for their work. Those aren't necessarily great reasons for rejecting it. And yet often you just go with a gut feel until you figure out how all that works together better as an argument against something. And even if I don't have a great argument, I can still look at that and say, yeah, not for me. Don't want that. I mean, Terraforming Mars has never been for me. I played it once and didn't really like it. So that's neither here nor there. But you can look at the AI generated thing and be like, that's not something I want to get involved with. I look at the work or the biography that comes out of me and my wife, and I'm just like, nope, that does not work at all. I see some of the artwork that comes out, and sometimes it's pretty interesting and neat, but it's not better than what I've seen humans do on their own with their hands, or of course with digital tools, but with them in control of those digital tools and everything that's going on, everything that they're making. It's all them putting their thought into making something. That's not there in the AI. I don't know. Maybe you have a better way to phrase it, a better way to explain that ickiness of just something not being right with what's out there. Maybe it's just a weird reactionary trait that I'll get over in time. I don't know. Probably not. I mean, because we've had things like automated spam and robocalls and all this other stuff, and that stuff is still gross and detestable. Never gotten used to that. Don't think I ever will at this point. It's been decades. So what is wrong with it? Maybe, again, summarize this better. Do my work for me. Be my AI and come up with the solution, the argument that I am trying to give based on this weird prompt of why it's not good. Synthesizing all this material. Or maybe you have your own ideas not related to what I'm saying about why it's gross. Or, of course, maybe you love it. Maybe you don't care. The Kickstarter campaign got 19,000 backers, more than $2 million in support. There are clearly a lot of people who didn't read the disclaimer or read the disclaimer and don't care. Whatever. There's some people who just love the game idea. The artwork is peripheral, irrelevant. I don't need it there. Doesn't matter. It doesn't affect me. I just go on with the game. Not interested. That happens a lot too. I don't know. I'm just curious to think about it, mostly because I'm a little unclear. So I'm just having a one-sided discussion at this point. And I think I've said the same thing now many times. So I'll wrap it up. Instead of being one of those AIs that just repeats things to fill space. We're going to get to 500 words for this essay just by putting in other stuff that doesn't matter. That's it. That's all I got. And that was me talking about it from my perspective, my history, not AI generated. Last thing I'll mention, Patrick Willems does video essays on movies primarily. And he did an essay recently on the TikTok trend of making Wes Anderson versions of different movies. And he essentially was talking about why it's garbage, because all they're doing is generating the surface style of Wes Anderson. We're centering things in the picture. We're doing these pastel images. We're giving this surface level look that you can recognize when you see it as a Wes Anderson style, but it's losing, or it's not presenting any of the elements that you would feel after watching a Wes Anderson movie. It's a really interesting essay, sort of covering the same idea of why AI seems off, and that it might have this surface level attractiveness to it, this appeal that catches your eye initially, and then you bite into that apple and it's just like, bleh, this is gross. Don't want this. Why would anyone do this? Someone's creating this on purpose and they think it's good? Not for me, thanks. I'll put a link to the essay. Maybe you can check it out, or just, again, tell me what you think. Thanks.